First, let me repeat that the biggest lesson, the most important lesson you will ever receive in a spiritual teaching is the one you heard last night on one power. The entire fault with our work and the entire reason for any failure that we have is that in some way, consciously or unconsciously, we give power to the things of this world, whether it is a power in sin, a power in disease, a power in false appetite, a power in that for which we have the false appetite. We fear disease. We fear certain types of disease. We fear certain conditions of disease, certain symptoms of disease. We fear depressions. We fear wars. In other words, we give power to them. We give power to them to do something to us. If it weren't that we gave them power, we wouldn't care whether there was a war or peace, whether there was a feast or a famine, whether there was a sickness or a health. There's only one reason we care which is which, and that is because of the effect that there will be upon us. In other words, we are giving power. Now, in approaching the spiritual life, the most important lesson that has to be learned is that there is no power in anything that exists as effect. All power is in the causative principle. All power is in the invisible. Once a thing is visible, do not fear it. I can go to an extreme and say to you that even if it appears as a man holding you up with a gun, don't fear it, since it is an effect. And if you could instantly and quickly realize this is an effect, there would be no harmful result to you, and there would be a great blessing to the other one. You would be surprised at the miracle that takes place the moment you realize that there is no power in person, thing, circumstance, condition, climate, weather. Now, watch your own history, your own metaphysical history, as you have tried to meet problems for yourself or others, and see if the stumbling block, the preventative agency, hasn't been either consciously you're giving power, or the very manner of your working to get rid of or rise above was giving it power. Whether you use the term getting rid of sin or disease, or whether you term it rising above it, or whether you call it overcoming the belief, you have in that degree or that measure given it a power, or you wouldn't have spent so much time trying to rise above it, or overcome it, or reduce it, or get rid of it. Now then, it takes a heap of doing to arrive at the state of consciousness when you can look at Pilate and say, thou couldst have no power over me unless it came from the Father within. It takes an awful lot of rising in consciousness to attain that consciousness that can look at any form of discord or disease and still say, so what? But there is one thing that I can give you that will be a help to you. This is one of the biggest contributions that the message of the infinite way can make to your spiritual development. Be careful that you do not glory in good health or good supply. Therein lies the secret of the healing work and the supplying work that I have found. The very moment you are glad that the fever went down, or the lump was reduced, or the income was doubled, in that moment you were setting a trap for yourself to fall into. Because the moment you rejoiced at human good, you set yourself to decry human evil. The very moment that you found something good in a good person, you set yourself to judge a bad person. The very moment that you decided the doctor says you're in good health and you're happy about it, that moment you laid the foundation for someone else to say you're not looking so well today and falling down to the other side. No. What is our reaction to good health or good supply or any demonstration of good? It is this. Yes, I indicated it with these flowers. If I see these flowers, I have a sense of gratitude for their being there, but I have something more important than that. I immediately go back to the fact that someone thought of them and placed them there. Someone had a sense of love, of thoughtfulness, or an appreciation of beauty, or a consideration for decoration and appearance and harmony. And so my mind goes back to the idea that love placed this here. This is not a bunch of flowers to me. This is an evidence of love in manifestation. In other words, what I'm seeing is the invisible cause of this visible effect. You follow that? If I were to glory in the flowers themselves, what would happen if I came down and there were no flowers there? Then I'd feel sorry for their absence. But this way, I'm virtually ensuring that there's never an absence of good in my experience by never gloating about the presence of good, but always rejoicing in the invisible cause, acknowledging Him in all thy ways, acknowledging the infinite invisible as the source. Now, it is in the same way with health. Do not permit yourself to be overcome by an evil appearance, but do not permit yourself to be overjoyed by an harmonious appearance. But whether looking at the discord or the harmony, get behind it to realize the invisible source of all good, to realize the infinite nature of God's goodness. Immediately take your thought off of the effect, whether the effect is a good effect or an evil effect, and get back to the cause. Now, the moment you do that, you take away all power from effect to be other than a joyous experience. That's all this is. This is a joyous experience to see flowers, and it's another joyous experience to see our harmonies and healthfulness and abundance of supply. But it's no more than that. It's just no more than that, and it's something that we want to share. Just the moment we are through with these tonight, we would love to see them go out and bless someone else. And as soon as we have our blessing of our dollars, we want to see those go out and bless somebody else. In other words, we see it as an endless chain of incoming and outgoing good. Why? Only because of the infinite source from which this good appears. And of course, as long as our mind is on the infinite invisible, the infinite invisible will be appearing to us visibly. However, if you lose your vision of the infinite invisible, remember, there's nothing to create these flowers out here in the room. They're never going to get here unless there is some love in this room. Do you see that? Nothing is ever going to come to you out of just a room or out of a universe. There may be a world of coal and iron and steel and all diamonds and rubies in the soil, but they're never going to come to you. There may be an overabundance of money in the banks, but it isn't going to come to you. Of its own accord, it's going to stay put right where it is. Now, something has to set in motion the supply and of health to you. And the thing that sets it in motion is the recognition of this invisible presence and power. That's what sets the circulation of good flowing in our direction. If the agriculturalist didn't know this, he'd never plant seeds in the ground. But he knows that in the planting of seeds in the ground, that an invisible presence takes over, and the first thing you know, there's crops above the ground. His reliance isn't on seeds. He knows that seeds never become other than seeds. Left to themselves, seeds will always be seeds. But the moment that invisible power begins to operate on them in the ground, now they become visible as crops. Now, so it is with us. We come into this room, and of course, you probably have felt that there is a very peaceful atmosphere in this room, a very joyous atmosphere in this room, nice atmosphere, comfortable atmosphere. Well, how did it get here? You had to bring it with you. It wasn't here before you came. It was just an empty room with walls and air and a ceiling and floor. That's all that was here. Now, all of a sudden, there is a feeling of love in this room, a feeling of communion, a feeling of peace, sometimes even a feeling of God's presence. How did it all get here? Was it here waiting for us when we came in? No. We brought it in. The very next group that may come in here may start shooting each other, if that is what they bring in with them. They won't find a war in this room. Nobody has ever found war on earth. Nobody's ever found peace on earth. War or peace are states of consciousness, and we bring them about. Now, it is the same way that no one finds success in the world. No one finds health sitting around in the world waiting for them. No one finds prosperity. Each one brings it into being through their state of consciousness. On the human plane, it is just enough to desire to be of service in the world or to be honorable in business dealings. Even that much love and integrity can bring prosperity. Much more is this so when it goes further than that and we determine to be a real service to our fellow man. That brings even a greater degree of love into expression, and therefore a greater degree of success and of supply. And so it is that the bread that we cast upon the waters is the bread that comes back to us. So that everything reduces itself to this, that your good starts as an activity of truth in your consciousness. That's where the flow of good starts. In the human world, you may have a flow of good from other people's demonstration, but on the other hand, you may lose it through your own, or you may lose it through someone else's. It can come to you, it can go from you, and sometimes you're responsible and sometimes you're not. Very often, health and disease or success or failure are just matters of chance or opportunity or time or occasion, with nobody having any control, each one being a victim either of good or of evil. But that changes in the life of the spiritual student when they realize, why no, there are no laws or circumstances operating outside of my being to influence me for good or for evil. I am not influenced by someone else's demonstration. I am not a victim even of the world's blunders. Why? Because I and the Father are one. And because the infinite nature of God is the infinite nature of my own being. And all that the Father hath is mine. And so with the activity of that truth in my consciousness, I have started the flow of good. But you see, there has to be, first of all, that activity of truth, or what we call recognition of the truth. You may call it a prayer, and you may call it a treatment. You see, all of these words, prayer, treatment, realization of truth, declaration of truth, statement of truth, activity of truth, they're all correct. You may use these terms interchangeably and say, well, it is necessary for me to pray without ceasing, as Paul said. I must pray without ceasing. Or, paraphrase it in the metaphysical terms, I must continuously be knowing the truth. I must be constantly knowing the truth. Or, I must be acknowledging God in all my ways. Any of these things states the situation as it really is, but it puts the matter squarely up to you. As far as God is concerned, God is. That you may know. God is. And because God is, all of the bounties of God are continuously in action, in operation, in manifestation, and in expression. There is never at any time an absence of God or good. This room is filled with the presence of God, whether or not we are in it. But the presence of God will do nothing for us except in proportion as we actively and consciously open ourselves to it. Now, this room will be just as much filled with the presence of God when the next group come in. But they may have their minds completely shut to it. They may have no thought of such a thing as God. Or they may be a group that thinks of God as being in church on Sunday. They may have no idea, no conception of God as being an omnipresent thing in their meetings. And so they will come into this room and bring in their human ingenuity and human cleverness and human wisdom and human power and human force and have all kinds of discords in this same room which is filled with the presence of God. Now, I'm sure the psalmist, in recognizing the presence of God in hell, turned hell into heaven. I'm sure that the psalmist, recognizing that in the valley of the shadow of death thou art there, turned the valley of the shadow of death into life eternal, all by an activity of truth in consciousness. So that, since it is necessary for us to pray without ceasing, since it is necessary for us to have the activity of truth consciously going on in our awareness, it must necessarily follow that we must know what that truth is that is to be kept active in our consciousness. It will not do just to pick up odd statements of truth here and there from this book or that book or the other book and just throw them around, mix them up in and out, because all truth isn't truth. All statements of truth are not truth, because there are presentations of truth from varying states of consciousness, and they may serve a purpose at one time and yet not be absolute truth itself. And so it is that it becomes necessary for each one of us really and truly to know what truth is in order to maintain a consistent message of truth. Now that is why in our work we have these certain principles which form the basis of our unceasing prayer, of our continuous treatments or knowing of the truth. And in spite of the fact that we have 20 books, and some of them have 100,000 words each, in spite of all that, you won't find many truths in those books. There are just a few principles of truth. It takes all of those books to state them in 1,000 different ways, but there aren't many truths in those books. One of the principal truths that you will find repeated over and over and over again is this one of one power, this one of the infinite invisible as the power appearing in our world as harmonious effects. Over and over and over you will find it taught there that our treatments do not consist in any way of healing disease, of overcoming discords, of using big powers to get rid of little powers. That our entire work is based on a realization that since God is power, that is the only power that there is. I can remember very distinctly one of our Christian Science Association addresses when some student asked the teacher, after you have given your treatment, how do you protect it? And our teacher said, well, I never thought of protecting a treatment, but as long as you mention it, I can see how I would handle that. I would say, thank you, Father, that I know that this treatment isn't going to heal anybody. Well, there you have another statement of the one power. Since there is only one power, even this truth we know isn't going to heal anybody. It's going really to reveal to us the effects and omnipresence of that one power. Now, we have the second principle of love thy neighbor as thyself, and we follow that out through all of the writings in one way or another. And so as you read the writings, you will find that there are just a few specific points that must be kept constantly in our consciousness, and we must be consistent in them. We cannot in one breath say God is the only power, and then when a patient comes and says, I'm sick, say, well, you know, you're a very jealous person. You'll have to get over that, because you have given jealousy a power. Nor can you say to another one, well, you know, you're not a very grateful person, or, well, do you read enough pages every day? You just cannot be inconsistent if you are praying without ceasing. You must pray a consistent prayer, a consistent realization of God, the Spirit, as the only power, and then watch that you do not give power to thoughts or to things or to persons. You give no power to persons, to things, or to thoughts. You give no power to right thoughts, and you give no power to wrong thoughts. Why don't you give power to right thoughts? Because even right thoughts can't change the fact that God is spirit, and this is a spiritual universe, and that's all that's to it. So your right thinking won't change that. But knowing this truth, that God is spirit and that this is a spiritual universe of one power, knowing this truth will dispel for you any illusory sense of a power or presence apart from God. But see how consistent you must be, that when you go out to battle, be sure you don't allow someone to put a coat of armor on you, because you will then be acknowledging a power that can harm you. Watch that you, like Daniel, go out with all innocency and stand and look the lions right in the mouth. Or go out with David and look right at Goliath, and the realization that I don't go out to evil, I go out in the name and nature of God. Now, in our work, again, which we call prayer, and we call treatment, and we call realization or meditation, there are two parts. As you already see, the secret of harmony lies in the activity of truth in your consciousness. In the degree of the activity of truth maintained in your consciousness, in that degree do you bring harmony into your experience. But now, this is an important point. There are two stages to the activity of truth in your consciousness. And the first stage is that wherein you declare all of the truth you know, wherein you make yourself consciously aware of spiritual truth. As you know, we always do that by starting with the word God. You know the reason for it. There is no truth about man. The only truth there is in the world is about God. You can never know the truth about man. You can never know the truth about a patient. You can never know the truth about a student. You can never know the truth about error. There isn't any truth about them. The only truth there is the truth about God. Now, the truth about God is God's infinity, God's eternality, God's immortality, God's omnipresence, God's omnipotence, God's omniscience. The truth about God is that God is an infinite lawgiver and God is an infinite law. Truth about God is that God is life. God is the life of individual being. God is the life of all being, whether it's vegetable, mineral, animal, so-called human. God is the only life. God is the only love. We know a dozen kinds of human love. Not one of them is really love. Each one of those represent but finite concepts of the one and only true love that there is, and that true love is the love of God, which flows from God through us to each other. There is only one love. There is only one true love. There is only one real love. And that love we may manifest to each other on the level of parent and child, husband and wife, child and parent, sister and brother, neighbor, friend, relative. Those are all different forms of our concept of the one and only love, which is the love of God, for God, and through God's creation. Now, knowing this truth about God, we are at the same moment knowing the truth about you and me, because God is you and me. God is your life and mine. God is your mind and mine. God is your soul and mine. God is your spirit and mine. God is really the substance of your being and of your body and of your pocketbook, because God being infinite, God is all. Now, there can't be more than God. Someone has well said that if you had God and all this world, you would have no more than the person who just had God. Surely not. Because God and all this world can't be more than God itself. When God is itself, the totality of all that is, and that totality of all that is your being and mine. So in knowing the truth about God, we are knowing the truth about individual being. And it's for this reason that when we are knowing a truth, when we are giving a treatment, we give the treatment only to God. Our treatment is about God, and is for God, and is to God, and never includes anybody or anything but God. We never take a sin or a disease or a lack into our treatment. We never take a human being into our treatment. We never take a person into our treatment. We never take the name of a person in our treatment. We never take the disease or their condition into our treatment. We keep our conversation in heaven. The sum total of our treatment is a treatment that we give to God about God. God, the infinite omnipresence, is really a law under the harmony of my being and of yours. The recognition of God as the soul and life of your being is the finest treatment. Now, here is the reason for it. You see, if I look out here and you all appear to be healthy, I'm judging from appearances, and some of you may not be healthy at all. Some of you may be right on the verge of death itself, so far as human experience is concerned, but I can't see that up here. Judging by appearances, I would go to bed very contented tonight that I have a room full of very healthy people. And then, in the middle of the night, get a shock when somebody phones and says, I'm very sick, or I'm in pain. Well, it didn't look that way to me. I looked around the room, and you're all very healthy. On the other hand, I may, sitting up here, see evidences of sickness, of discord, of inharmony, of unhappiness. And if I allow myself to judge by that, I will be the blind leading the blind. And then I can be of help to nobody. So I have only one alternative, and that is to sit here and keep my mind centered on God and realize that actually God is the only life in this room. God is the only soul. God is the only being. God is the only person even. God is all there is to everyone in this room. God is literally the all in all. How then does that benefit you individually? In the same way that the centurion's servant was benefited when the centurion said to the master, my servant is sick, and the centurion's servant was immediately made well. How did the treatment reach the centurion's servant when the centurion's servant hadn't asked for it, didn't know anything about it, wasn't reaching out for it? Well, the idea was this. While you are sitting in this room physically, you actually are not wholly in this room. You're partly in this room, but not wholly. Part of you is at home with your mother or your sister or your child or your patient or your student. And therefore, right at this minute, somebody or other is right here and invisibly in this room in your consciousness. You have brought them to this room. Now you have brought your consciousness into my consciousness. And of course I've been sitting here most of the day and very much of the nights keeping my consciousness with God. So now right here I and the Father are one. And you also have kept your consciousness as much as you could with God, but you're now bringing it here to me knowing that I'm abiding in God. And so you'll find that actually your patient is right here in your consciousness with you, and both you and your patient are right here in my consciousness with me, and all of us are in the Father consciousness. I in you, you and me, and we in God. Do you see that? Now then, any truth that takes place in my consciousness is a law unto you and to everybody that you now have in your consciousness. Every activity of truth that takes place within me is now taking place within every one of you who are receptive, and it is affecting your lives and the lives of those who are in your consciousness, who are themselves in any way receptive. They may not know that they are. For instance, your cat may be sick or your dog, and they consciously know nothing about God. But actually they live in your consciousness. They look to you for food or supply or for comfort. And so actually they are abiding in your consciousness and confidence. And you've brought them here. No reason when you go home why you shouldn't find them perfectly well if they weren't when you left there. And so it is with your family or with your children or with your patients or with your students. Every time that you lift yourself into the consciousness of God or bring yourself into the consciousness of one who is striving to live in the consciousness of God, you are lifting up this entire scene. I, if I be lifted up, shall draw all men unto my own level of consciousness. And so in the degree that I am lifted up, you are lifted up. In the degree that you are lifted up, everyone in your life is lifted up in some measure, in some degree, and they are benefiting. You see, we do not exist as physicalities. We exist as states of consciousness. And there's only a little bit of your consciousness present in this room. The rest of it's home, and the rest of it's with some relative or some friend or somewhere around this globe. Do you see that? They are embraced in your consciousness. You are embraced in my consciousness. I am embraced in God consciousness. Therefore, I am in you, and you are in me, and we, both of us, are in God. Now then, when an individual asks you for help, you do not have to, in turn, think of that individual. On the contrary, if you do, you're not thinking of them, you're thinking of a mortal concept of them. The only way that you truthfully are thinking about your patient is when you're thinking about God. Because then you're really thinking about the true being of one who at the moment may think of themselves as a patient or a sick person. Now, I embrace you spiritually in my consciousness only in the degree that I maintain myself in God consciousness. That's all. If I am not maintaining myself in God consciousness, then I am seeing you humanly. And even though I were to be very generous and call you good humans, that would have no spiritual or healing value. I may even judge by appearance and say, my, what a healthy-looking lot of people we have here, and that will not be any blessing to you. The only blessing I can be to you is when I disregard both the good and the evil about you and know only the spiritual about you. Is that clear? Never am I blessing you when I'm thinking good about you, and I'm not cursing you when I think evil about you. I'm just wasting my own time. But it is a definite blessing to you when I am thinking spiritually about you, when I am living in the realization of God as your soul, when I am thinking of infinite divine love as the substance of your being, when I am living in the realization that you live under the law of God, the great lawgiver, the spiritual lawgiver, the law of spirit, when I know that spiritual law is the only law unto individual being, and that there are no laws of matter, no laws of horoscopes, no laws of astrology, no laws of sin, no laws of economic depressions, no laws of wars, that there is only one law, that's a spiritual law that emanates from God, and it embraces the children of God. It embraces, enfolds, envelops every child of God, every offspring of God. It is God itself in expression. Now, in that spiritual realization, I am a blessing to you. Now, in the same way, if you go out into a store to shop or to market or to buy or to sell, and you merely say, they have good clerks here, or they have nice clerks here, or you're a pleasant clerk, you are not blessing them one bit. Not one bit. You may be acknowledging the appearance as it is, but you're not blessing them. You are only blessing them when you look behind their good qualities and say, my God is expressing itself beautifully in you. God is flowing through you. God is expressing and manifesting itself in you. Then you have them under treatment. You are praying for them. Do you see that? You are forgiving them their debts. You are forgiving them their sins. You are forgiving them any errors that they may have made during the day in the acknowledgement of their spiritual identity. Watch out. The Infinite Way is very clear on this point, that indulging good human thoughts isn't of any more value than indulging bad human thoughts. Neither the good human thoughts bless nor the bad human thoughts curse. Neither of them are value, neither of them there are power. Why? Your thoughts are not my thoughts, saith the Lord. And it is only my thoughts, God's thoughts, that are power. And so your thoughts are no power, not your good thoughts and not your evil thoughts. But the truth is power, for there is only a truth about God. So when you are knowing the truth of God's omnipotence, God's omnipresence, God's omniscience, God's wisdom, God's government, God's law, God's rule, then you are praying without ceasing. Now, every bit of this is an activity of truth in consciousness. Every bit of this is really keeping truth active in consciousness, and it is praying without ceasing. But it is only the first part of our endeavors, because the real value doesn't yet lie in this part of the activity of truth. This is only the foundation on which we stand. After we have known this truth, after we have been conscious of this truth, I'm speaking more particularly now in meditation or in treatment, there is that second part in which God reveals itself in us, in which we no longer declare the truth or know the truth, in which we no longer make truth active in our consciousness, but in which truth makes itself active in our consciousness, and we, instead of being the thinker or declarer or treater or prayer, we are the one who becomes aware of the treatment or prayer or truth. In our further work, you will learn that in the last analysis, we do not pray. This that we have done so far this evening isn't really prayer or knowing the truth. It is only the first stage of it. The real praying now begins. At the point where we have declared or realized all of the truth that we can about God and God's operation and God's law and God's presence and God's goodness and so forth. Now we come to that place of our treatment where we rest back and take the attitude of, "Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth." Now, Father, I've said all the truth I know, now it's your turn. And here we take a listening attitude. We call it a state of receptivity. Now, sooner or later, God must speak to us. God must speak within us. Sooner or later, an impulse must come within our being that tells us, that announces to us, God is on the field. That is really the highest form of prayer or realization or treatment, and it is in that part, the second half of our work, when the real healing influence comes into expression. This that we have done for, be surprised, it's about 50 or 55 minutes. All this that we have done is only a preparation for the real and powerful part of our spiritual lives. The next 1 to 5 minutes is the important part. That's when God itself actively enters our consciousness and we become consciously aware of that presence and receive the assurance, and then we smile and say, "Thank you, Father. God is on the scene." So that you may spend 5, 10, 15 minutes in this preparation, in this declaration of truth, in this realization of truth, in this praying, or you may spend 55 minutes. Don't be in a hurry. Be willing to know every bit of truth about God you can. Then sit back and wait for the next 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 minutes. And you'll find that if you have done this work well, that you will be in such a calm, peaceful mood that outside thoughts will not very greatly intrude. If they do, you always have a remedy. While you're sitting there waiting for God to announce itself, you can take a word like God and just keep your thought centered on it. God. God. Well, God is. God is. Yes, God is. God is love. God is. God is here. God. God fills all space. God. And you just do that gently, calmly, while you're waiting. Remember that what you're really doing is you're waiting. You're waiting. And then, in a second, you either feel yourself flooded with warmth or presence or with light, or you feel a release as if a weight had dropped off your shoulder, or in some way or other, so many million different ways in which God announces itself, that to everyone it's different, and sometimes every day of the week it comes in a different way. But the upshot is that in one way or another you now have a feeling, well, whereas before I was down, now at least I know God is here, God is on the scene, and you get up and you drop everything out of your mind and go about your business. And then, as the discords of the day or others intrude, you can always smile and block it out with, no, God is on the field. No, I have really felt the presence of God. God is on the field. I can leave this with God. You see, it's safe to say, leave this with God after you have felt the presence of God. It's very bad to say, oh, leave it to God, if you haven't felt the presence of God, because you're not leaving it to God. You're just making a statement about leaving it to God. There wasn't any God there to leave it to. You can only safely leave it to God after you have had the experience God is on the field. That's why I learned this in the earliest days of my work with meditation. I learned this, that on those days when I got the click, the awareness of God, before I left the house, those were days of peace and good and prosperity and harmony and everything running well. And on the days when I didn't attain that click, there were very apt to be human discords enter the picture. But as time goes on, and this click gets to be more and more of an habitual thing, then you're living in that atmosphere all the time, and you don't have those down days. You don't have those days when things go wrong. Oh, you may have them for a second or two, or you may fight with yourself quite a bit, but way in back of your mind, you do have the sense, well, God is on the field, and even this will pass. But now remember, this part of our work sets the infinite way apart from much of the work that you have been doing. These 2 points, these 3 points. One and all, the first one, that you give no recognition to thought, thing, or person. You give no recognition to any power except the power of the invisible. Secondly, your treatment takes no one into it, takes no condition into it, takes no circumstance, no name, no person. It's purely a treatment in the realm of God. Third, that it is the degree of the activity of this truth in your consciousness that determines the harmony of your life. And above all, it is the ability to attain the second half of that activity of truth and consciousness when you are becoming aware of truth rather than you declaring the truth. When truth declares itself within you, when the still small voice says to you, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. Not when you say it to somebody else. You remember this? I've said this all through the writings, and continuously people are telling me or somebody else that I say I am God, or that man is God, or that you are God. Please remember this. I do say I am God. But I don't say it. I only say to you that that's the truth that I hear with the inner ear. It says, I am God, and I rest in that. If you say, I am God, that's not true. If you hear, I am God, that is true. If I say to you, I will never leave you nor forsake you, that is not true. But if you hear within your inner ear, I will never leave you nor forsake you, that is true. In other words, it is God speaking in us that is the law of harmony unto our lives. It is the ability to become aware of the presence of God. It is the consciousness of the presence of God, the conscious awareness of the presence of God. It is the still knowing inside, not that we know, the knowing that knows itself in us. That's why in the infinite way it says very early, be a beholder. Watch the harmonies of God appear in your experience. That only comes as you develop this inner listening ear. You prepare for it by knowing the truth. Know all the truth you possibly can. Don't try to blank the mind. Don't try to shut out the human mind. Use it. Know all the truth you possibly can. But don't think that that's a healing power. Don't think that's God power. It isn't. That is a preparation for you lifting you into a higher atmosphere. Now when you've gotten there, now be still. Now let God have the floor. And in one way or another, something in you will register, and you'll say, oh, it's all right. Outwardly, nothing's happened, but inwardly, the infinite, the allness, the perfection has revealed itself. And that is our work. Now then, the last point that I make is to watch yourself, that you are not judging the evil appearances, nor are you judging the good appearances, but that you're seeing through to the spiritual appearances. Therein lies your power, not in fearing evil and not in loving good, but in looking through both the evil and the good to the invisible spiritual truth. Then you're bringing God consciously into your experience. Thank you.